Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Jane the Virgin, Season 2, Episode 6, Chapter 28. In this episode, Jane is really having a hard time balancing grad school and being a mother. And while I know everybody was trying to be encouraging, telling her to go to school and not put it off until after things had calmed down with the baby, I really don't know if they were right. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Claire for commissioning this episode. What's up, Claire, if you're out there? This was a really, really fun episode. It just had a lot of elements that I like, a few moments where I genuinely laughed out loud. It felt a little sillier than some of them tend to. And there were, the fact that there were all of these like major time jumps in, we're 10 minutes into the episode and we jump ahead a month, and then another 5 minutes and we jump ahead another month. I actually kind of liked that. And it makes sense that they're doing this as well, so that we're not dealing with Petra being pregnant the whole season. We've got her probably giving birth within the next few episodes. So then we'll be dealing with an actual set of twins, as it turns out, which is really, I feel like, if I were Jane, I would be simultaneously very relieved that I had not had twins, because that is so much. But also, I'd be like, wow, you really had to one-up me. Like, you also had to get pregnant with this kid, but you got pregnant with two of his kids. Wow. Okay. I would take it very fucking personally. So, let me back up here and start from the beginning. This whole flashback is really, really short. We've got Janie, and she's so teeny tiny. I love this baby that they have here just reaching for her little stuffy. And all it is a sort of reflection on how fast time goes. That's really it. There's not much of a flashback here. But Jane is really relieved because Matteo is fine. He's not even going to scar from that glass that cut him. And she is starting grad school. Now, this is so difficult for me because I just had a bit of a rant in the Discord. There's a channel on there about health and wellness, and I shared about 3 weeks ago my frustration with coping with having gained a lot of weight, and I know it's for like not great reasons. You can be fat and healthy, and I have been, but currently I am fat and unhealthy because I have not been working out. I have not been watching what I'm eating at all. I have just been sort of riding the roller coaster over the past year because of the stress with the dogs and everything. And now we're down to one dog, and I'm starting to feel like I really need to begin to get it together. And my instinct is always to do something quite dramatic, whether it be like a diet plan, counting calories, joining some subscription thing, downloading an app, whatever. And that I had a sort of realization that I don't actually need any of that. My reasons for doing that sort of dramatic thing are because a part of me knows what I really need is increased awareness and mindfulness. And jumping onto a project of that type can temporarily make me mindful and give the illusion that I've begun to do that for myself. But as soon as the excitement of that sort of new app, new diet plan, whatever wears off, I begin to slide back into easier, more comfortable habits. And so the issue is not finding a program. The issue is learning how to simply be mindful all the time and managing to make that part of my life. And another aspect of it is I want things to be settled and in place before I start something new, which I don't know if I'm the only one out there who has experienced this over the last few years. But, I got divorced. I moved here from Connecticut to Texas. I got a new job when I moved down here and had that job for several months before switching to another one, getting fired, then starting the podcast, working for myself, really, really struggling financially, eventually getting to a more stable place. Owen proposes, we're planning the wedding, then COVID hits, then we go and get married and have our honeymoon. We come home and several months later, the puppies, and then that whole thing. The illusion in my mind of getting to a place where I will be settled down enough, where everything will be in a routine enough that I can now make life changes will never happen. And I am beginning to really understand that the point of creating mindfulness in my life is because that is supposed to be the stable through line. I'm trying to make it an accessory to the stability of my life, but my life will never be calm and stable. That's the nature of it. There will be crisis after crisis, change after change. That's always going to be there. And I have to find an island of self-care and awareness within that, so that I can have something to hold on to when everything begins to hit the fan in a new way, as it inevitably will. Not always for bad reasons. I mean, I got married and I got to plan this gorgeous wedding and it was great reasons, but it was hugely stressful and very tumultuous and lots of money and change. I understand, in other words, that putting things off until it feels like everything has, quote, settled down is not necessarily always the way to go. I have really grown to believe that is a perfectionist quality in me and that I really need to watch out for it because it can be a lie. That said, Jane having a essentially newborn child and going to grad school, in my opinion, is fucking madness. I respect her desire to do it. I completely understand everybody's motivations in telling her not to let motherhood totally swallow up her life, to continue pursuing her dreams. I fully recognize the value of that kind of advice. And I also really appreciate that she has a lot of help. She's got her mother, she's got her grandmother, she has Raphael. That's more help than a lot of people have, But the kid is still a literal infant. And while I don't want to say put it off until everything is, quote, easier, because that makes it sound like motherhood just gets easier. It just changes from what I understand. It doesn't necessarily get easier. There is a certain type of chaos, sleeplessness, and profound fatigue that goes with caring for an infant. And I just can't really get behind. Beginning a graduate work is very, very demanding. And I can't support like having this child that needs constant care. Literally, his skull is still forming. So he begins to get a flat head because he's laying on his back too much. That's how crucial this time is. I just do not feel starting grad school at this point is a good idea. I am not saying it can't be done. I am not saying that there aren't women out there who are able to do both. I am saying that for me, watching this episode and the way that Jane is literally falling asleep in class, she's coming late, she's leaving to take calls that turn out to be nothing. There will be a point in her life with this child where he is old enough that he is sleeping and she is able to make it through a whole class without passing out, that there will be a slightly more evened out schedule for her, you know? Like, even with me and the puppies, I have Pippin still, but he takes so much less work than he did when he was very little. When I had to be taking him outside every 2 hours, or he was ill and we were having to, you know, take shifts at night to get up and force feed him and his brothers. There is a definite calm down now. So there are times where putting things off till things are, quote, more settled is just an excuse to procrastinate and wait for the perfect time, which never comes. But there is also a reality to certain times of life being more chaotic than others. And I just feel it's Jane setting herself up for, if not failure, then extreme frustration. Which it makes sense that the show went in this direction, because this is much more interesting to watch than Jane deciding not to pursue her dreams and stay home. And I will say that I appreciate the very realistic depiction of what it's like to decide that you're going to pursue your dreams and raise your child. They are not making it seem like she's Superwoman and she can just do it all. And it's, you know, with help, it's effortless. Even with all the help she has, it's still really, really hard. So in that sense, I'm like, you know, good on you for showing it in its real light. But I just really wanted to take her and be like, girl, are you sure that you can manage this? Because is it worth the cost? And especially because what Jane is really like, she's, you know, comes into the first class and says that she is here to finish her novel, and they start laughing because before she got there, their professor, or I don't know if he's a professor, he like seems like he's barely older than her, but he explicitly said, apparently, I am not going to help you finish your novel. If Jane really wants to finish her novel, she could do that without school. Plenty of people do. I am certain school would help the book be better. So I, once again, get why she wants to do this. But, you know, so this whole episode is very, very stressful because she is like me, where she wants to be the teacher's pet in some ways. Let's be real. She gets a lot of validation out of authority figures telling her that she's a good girl who has done what she's supposed to do. And all she gets repeatedly is told she is not doing enough. And it's not just this class either. There are parenting classes that Raphael is going to without her. She misses like 4 of them in a row. So when she comes in at one point, there's all this choreography for a little like dance that they do, and she doesn't know any of it. And everybody is filling her in about shit that went down that she didn't know about. And there is a feeling of inadequacy to this as well. And I was like, I maybe this is my problem, that the stress of doing both these things and neither of them you feel like you're doing right. Maybe this is also just part of life, that you kind of always are, in a sense, letting down some aspect of your goals. But I just don't want to believe that, because that's so bleak. So I like to think that it's within my control to choose what goals I'm going to pursue so that I don't let things down. And, you know, maybe I'm just being unrealistic. I don't know. So let's really, really quickly deal with Michael, because he's on a road trip at this point with Nadine. And it turns out that he called her and asked her to meet up because Sin Rostro has completely destroyed his life. And I just really, really want to mention, you guys, this thing that I think is always so funny. So Nadine's in the car. She asks him if he wants any chips, and she holds out a bag of Let's chips, which I think were in the office, if I'm not mistaken. I always like it when there's a brand that a company decides that they're going to use in all their stuff. And it's also one of those things where they slice the top of the chip bag off clean. So it's clearly never been sealed at the top, or else somebody just went across it with like a paper cutter, because it has perfectly straight open edges like it's a commercial. And it looks so weird to me. I was like, guys, just get a like regular thing, seal it shut, and then tear it open. Make it look real. It looks so bizarre. It does not matter, but I just had to mention it because it's big and like waved in the camera a few times, you know? So he wants to take Sinrostro down, and he is hoping that because Nadine was also put in a position where she was forced to comply, if she's telling the truth about that, that she will help him. And there's like a very brief moment later on where he surprises his old partner. And I hesitate to like even use that word because she really wasn't his partner. She was put in place to like find out shit about him. And they only worked together for like a second before shit went left. But he is just waiting for her and is like, we need to talk about some things. So that's pretty much it on Michael. The next thing that I want to talk about is the meeting with the lawyer who is going to be setting up their wills and dealing with the like trust for the baby and everything. I am pretty certain that this guy is Typhoon from Parks and Rec, who winds up becoming really good friends with Ron. He becomes his like new hairdresser. I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure. And this dude is, you know, they need to talk about every eventuality. What happens if you're on life support? What happens if both of you die? Like, who do you want taking care of him? Who do you want managing the trust? And this is when Jane finds out that the amount of money is just so far beyond what she had expected. It's $40 million. Now, when he said you're dealing with about 40, right? I thought we were talking 40,000 in just the trust fund for the son, just like that was set up. I didn't realize that we were talking about the entirety of Raphael's wealth. So I was shocked when he said million. And then I realized we were talking about everything, because 40 grand in the trust fund seemed really weirdly low. And I was like, that's not even enough for college. Like, you know, but Jane is really caught off guard here because apparently she didn't fully understand the money that she was dealing with. This is something that I cannot imagine. And I mean, by not imagine, of course, I mean $40 million, but mostly what I mean is that she didn't know how much Raphael would like. I feel like this would have to had come up at some point. And even if it hadn't, I would be assuming we're talking tens of millions with somebody who owns a resort this size. I would just be assuming like at the minimum, like 8 or 9 million, but really, yeah, tens of millions for a resort where you can like, there was just no question in my mind. So I was kind of surprised how taken aback she is. And one of the classes that she misses, Raphael, like when she finally comes back, tells a story about one of their babies freaking out because he didn't have his lovey, which is some sort of toy that seems like a combo of like a stuffed animal and a blanket. And he goes out and buys a bunch of backup ones just in case the kid ever loses one, because that child had such a tantrum that it instilled a fear in him of, oh my God, I never want to be caught like that again, because the child just screamed for a straight up hour until he got his toy. And he goes and buys like 10 backup ones. And understandably, Jane is kind of like, oh my God, I don't know about my son growing up with all this money. I don't want him to be spoiled, and I want him to like know how to appreciate things, which I really understand. And so it kind of becomes a bone of contention between her and Raphael, who at one point says to her, struggling, or I don't remember what wording he uses, but he says, like, not having money doesn't make you a better person, which I actually quite liked. This is a surprising thing maybe coming from me, because I can be very eat the rich all the time. But I had a recent thing happen on TikTok. A woman who has 4 children, I think she said, or 3 children, and is married. She and her husband had paid their like mortgage and filled their tank with gas and got groceries, and were left with only like $200 until the Friday after next, because the inflation issue has gotten so completely out of control that people are not able to afford to live right now. And she recorded this TikTok where she was really upset and crying about, like, I don't know what we're going to do. He and I both have good jobs. I'm a nurse and we can't make it. And we've worked our whole lives and we've been careful, and still. And a lot of people had a reaction that I understand in a way, of just like, well, you're lucky to have $200 left. But what frustrated me was, like, there is this weird puritanical like standard that we have. And it's the same thing as like, oh, really? You got 8 hours of sleep last night? That must be nice. I only got 4 hours. And it's supposed to be a kind of badge of honor that you like struggle more than other people. And so people were doing that all over the place, sharing this video and low-key laughing at her for getting upset because she doesn't know what it really means to go hungry, to be homeless. And it was so frustrating to watch because, like, no, she doesn't. But that doesn't mean that this isn't wrong. She and her husband both work full time, and they have 4 children, and they can't afford to pay their, because people were saying, oh, well, her bills are paid at least. No, they're not. She paid her mortgage and they put gas in the car and got groceries. That's not talking about any other bills. And they only have $200 to last them for a week and a half. With 4 children, like, that's gone in several days. If, you know, depending on what's going on at school and supplies that you need to get, or if there's an accident and you need to get something fixed in the car, or a kid goes to the doctor or gets sick, like a million things can just completely wipe that out in one stroke. And it frustrated me a lot to see how many people wanted to play this like a suffering Olympics and be like, well, I have it worse, or I know people who have it worse. It can always be worse, but that doesn't invalidate what somebody is actually going through. And it was a bizarre thing to me to see that, like, people didn't have the understanding that just because somebody is doing better than you financially, it doesn't mean that they aren't on the same side in the, like, class wars, for lack of a better way of saying it. Somebody who is not able to pay their electric bill because they had to pay their mortgage is in the same boat in general as somebody who doesn't have a home. Yeah, like, yeah, they have that's a light years away in the small picture. But if you're looking at the big picture, she and her husband are a couple of emergencies away from being homeless themselves. And it was a weird thing to me how much we seem to think that the more we struggle, the more noble we are. Struggling is not inherently noble. This struggle many of us are experiencing is manufactured. It's a false struggle created to keep us down. And so taking pride in it and putting down others who aren't suffering as much as we are is actually only assisting in dividing us just the way those who are in power and who have money would like us to. Now, I want to really emphasize, I understand somebody like Raphael doesn't fall into this category. You know, $40 million, he doesn't fucking qualify as being, but saying like just not having enough money doesn't make you a better person. I really believe that. I think there is a point at which having everything very easily means that you are disconnected from what most people experience and maybe lack some empathy because you simply don't have the perspective that you would. But I also can understand his frustration at Jane bucking every time the suggestion of just giving Matteo something comes up. So, and you know, like this was something that I was also wondering about, the way in which money was going to play into the way they raise their child, because it really did seem Raphael was prepared to give Matteo everything he needed with no question, and he would see that as being a good father. And I don't really fault him for that. But I understand Jane feeling like there is an appreciation that comes with knowing that something didn't just fall out of the sky into your lap. There had to be something done to earn it, or patience associated with it, or something. And that was part of what I liked about Rogelio giving her that car, is that it just seems like this, like, oh my God, you gave me a car, sort of a status gift. But then when he tells her about how he never had a car, and he sees her pregnant, working, taking the bus everywhere, and he wanted to do something big to help her, I really loved that there was that very personal aspect. There was a story to why he chose something that could be taken as simply ostentatious, you know? So anyway, I just like this discussion between the two of them, and the family, like the planning of what they're going to be doing for their wills and everything is extremely important. And I think a lot of us don't do it because it just feels like we always have more time. Like it just, so many of us are going to die younger than we expect to die. And we're going to think that we didn't need to do this, and it will prove to be wrong. And you also, you know, have to pay a lawyer, and you have to get things in place in a way that we often just don't have the resources to do. So there's a real like gap in terms of what the average person is prepared for and what somebody like Raphael is prepared for. And also, Raphael has $40 million to worry about, whereas the rest of us often don't have as many things that they need to protect. But I will say though, guys, if you are out there listening to this and you have the means to get your affairs in order and you are above the age of 30 and you haven't yet, go do that. Just to get a load off your mind and just get it done, and make sure somebody's got all the passwords they need to get into your shit. Oh, just put it in place. Owen and I are starting to work on this finally. You know, I'm going to be 40 next year, and I've really started to be like, I have got to start considering things in a way that I haven't before. So briefly, I'm going to go over to Rogelio. Oh my God, you guys, I cannot. So he and his co-star, his ex-wife, can't even bear to like touch each other. So they have a scene where they're supposed to kiss, and it immediately cuts and goes to a couple of body doubles who kiss on their behalf. And then he announces at the end of this rehearsal, because apparently this is like the grand finale of the show, or maybe not the show, but like, I'm trying to get to the scene. I'm sorry, there was a weird error and Netflix was just like, pardon the interruption. But he says, oh yeah, here it is. The follow-up to the legendary Santos, I promise I will take you all with me. And his ex-wife knocks him out of the way and says that won't be necessary because the entire crew is joining me on my next telenovela, Fernando e Isabel. And one of the guys, what does he say? Grip number 2. How could you? He says, sorry, they just go right into production. And then a poster drops and she says, you'll never guess who's playing Fernando. And it's his arch nemesis, Esteban, who winks at him. It's very fun, you guys. It looks really Tudor-y. I haven't watched the Tudors. I have heard that it's, quite soapy. But this is something that I'm looking forward to seeing clips of. And I don't know if it will ever come up that we see it, but I hope we do. I really do enjoy fake TV shows within TV shows. It's such a fun thing. So now Rogelio is trying to think up another project, and he decides to go with Hombres Locos, basically madmen, but absolutely missing the point of what Mad Men is and going for only the gloss and aesthetic of it. And he says, I'll be like John Hamm, but very good looking, which is first episode. Bam, Don Juan shoots his wife Beatriz and sets off in search of his one true love. And the woman that he's speaking to, I'm not sure what her name is or her role. She says, what can I say? We're really interested. And outside of his door, she speaks to somebody who I'm assuming is her assistant and says, we'll give him a limited budget. He'll drive it into the ground and then we'll Heather Locklear him. And the girl gives an impression of not knowing what she means. And so she says, put him on whatever show needs a ratings boost. So when we eventually do check back in with Rogelio, he has indeed run it into the ground. They are like 14 days behind out of 19 days of shooting, which is remarkable. And so then he decides that he's going to shop the show to somebody else who loves it because they think that it's actually a comedy, which is understandable. I am really looking forward to that aspect of things. Oh my God, you guys. And I love the fact that he gets really pissy about the fact that this Fernando e Isabel, it could have just been, oh, we're just going to have a cool show that you're not on. But at one point, they have a character on who is specifically meant to be mocking Rogelio. This dude is out here with the same hairstyle. It looks like it is the guy who's the body double. And he's holding a leopard, like a stuffed animal leopard in one hand. And the collar and everything of his outfit, it looks like he's meant to be the fool of the court. Because there's little bells hanging off it and everything. Anyway, so yeah. He says, I have secured a private investor, which I was going to announce until I saw this atrocity. And yeah, the dude thought that it was a comedy. So that's going to be performed, but he doesn't seem to fully appreciate what it is they're going to be going for here. I just really... He says, The Passions of Santos was the most popular telenovela on earth. To follow that up, the scrutiny will be intense. I love when she says, I didn't know that you were feeling that much pressure. And he says, I hide my nerves incredibly well. It's one of my most underrepresented or underrated talents. So this, I'm looking forward to. That's all I got to say about that. Let's deal with Petra next. Petra isn't sure what she's going to do with Milos. She's trying to sell these fucking hand grenades. He has a disagreement with the gentleman who had been on the line to buy them. And she is very, very concerned, Petra is, about having these in her. I don't know if it's that she thinks that something is going to happen with like a person coming in and causing violence to get them, or whether she thinks something is going to go wrong with the bombs themselves and that there might actually be some kind of accident that sets them off. But yeah, she's really determined to get rid of these things. And she wants for this deal to work out, because then they'll be gone. But he gets so like pissy because this dude isn't paying as much as he originally agreed. And then he says something about how I'll pay this much and I get to sleep with your wife. And Milos just loses it and starts to lunge at this guy. And she's very stressful dealing. She's like got a really bad pregnancy in comparison to Jane. She's got a lot of nausea. She's got a lot of like fatigue, and everything is just very difficult for her physically. So between that and Milos being an imbecile and dangerous and completely unpredictable, she wants her mother. She wants to feel like there is somebody out there who has her back and can help things. And her mother says, I wish I was out so I could help you. And she says, I wish you were out too, mother. And her mother says, well, there might be a way. Narrator, ooh, what way is the way? Oh my God, you guys, I'm never going to get tired of these jokes. I really won't. So it turns out that Petra is simply going to appeal to Jane's sense of decency. She is going to sit down and be like, look, I am really having a hard time and I miss my mother. And if you could just like see it in your heart to petition with me for her release. And Jane says, she pushed my grandmother down the stairs. And Petra says, I know and I get why you would say no, but I'm pregnant and overwhelmed by the baby. And Rogelio, we jump to him saying that's a hard no, but he is responding to something else. It turns out that Jane has agreed to help Petra out. So the whole thing with Jane in this episode, kind of like the two of them are more friendly at this point than they have been, and I'm interested to see exactly how long that lasts. But we see Petra like collecting her mother from the prison, and immediately her mother starts criticizing that she has gained weight, which is really funny because I'm standing there looking at Petra thinking how not actually pregnant she looks, because she is so thin. And there's like, it's not that you can't be thin and be pregnant, but when you are thin and you get pregnant, there is a sort of like roundness that happens. Even if you are thin, you just look a little bit like you've swelled, because you have like literally there's like inflammation happening a lot of the time. And there's a look that women get, especially in the face, that I have noticed. There's a difference when you watch a TV show and an actress was clearly actually pregnant versus it being a plot line. And I was looking at her just thinking she does not actually look pregnant. And then her mother is like starting to get on her case. So Petra is like, it's really not constructive for you to be critical right now. I am trying to facilitate a positive atmosphere around the pregnancy. And she has found out at this point that she's having twins. So there's a real extra stress factor here. I was about to say stress fracture. And Rogelio, or not Rogelio, Raphael as well is a bit shocked at this point because like he hasn't been getting laid. So these are two women that he has like knocked up, but he hasn't gotten to fuck them to do it. And this leads to him winding up dating a little bit this episode. But it turns out that like Petra is seeing a therapist, and that is why she's starting to draw some boundaries with her mother. And it's a really kind of interesting way to go. Her mother is clearly like, oh, I have to get you away from this therapist because they're going to tell you I'm wrong about everything. And I have to say that if you think that's what's going to happen, maybe you are wrong about everything, just FYI. So then we have a whole thing where they're trying to get Milos out of the country or out of their, like, just away so they can do something to dispose of these grenades. And nothing works. Eventually, one of his guys who they had used to be holding hostage is assigned to watch them. But Petra reports Milos for his criminal activity. He gets locked up and this dude has to like go and help him, and it's a whole emergency situation, so he gets called away. They decide they're just going to dump the grenades off the back of a boat. I really have to say, you guys, I find this to be a weird plot point. I understand not wanting somebody who's dealing in illegal weapons around. I really do. I also feel like tricking him into going away so you can just dump them when they're worth what he was going to get for them, which I think was like 1.8 million. Just throwing them into the ocean is going to go so badly for you. Like, this is just, to me, absolutely not the way to handle it. And I can't, I confess completely up front, I don't know what way I would handle it. I don't have like a better idea. I'm just saying that, to me, deciding to simply like low-key like rob him and trash all of the stuff that he has been going to sell feels like the worst possible choice out of all of the choices that you had. And maybe that's just me. I don't know. But we get at that point a moment that I was standing there like, is this really happening? And it isn't the way that I thought. But there's one particular grenade that has like fallen out and a pin got pulled. It doesn't make any sense how this worked. Not even a little bit. But Magda picks it up and looks at it and is like, that's weird. Where's the pin? And then it explodes in her hand, and we jump ahead to her with a hook and an eye patch. You guys, this show is so stupid. A hook and an eye patch. We're just doing them all. We're just going to do it. Okay, it's hard to even be mad at that. And I really thought that maybe she was going to die. Like, how good are these grenades if it goes off and it only takes your hand and one eye? That really does seem like a subpar product. I'm going to say maybe this guy was right to walk away from the deal, because if you're holding a grenade when it goes off and it doesn't kill you, that's weak sauce. I'm sorry, but I feel like you really want a little bit more oomph than that. Is that just me? I don't know. So anyway, when we go to her, she's eating like pickles that are on the hook of her hand. Like, you guys, I can't. So eventually there's a conversation between Jane and Petra in the hallway where Petra is talking to Jane about how she thinks that Jane was probably just a natural at all of the mothering stuff. She starts to be like, who taught you? And then she's like, no, I bet you just like understood it. And Jane is like, lol, absolutely not the case. Like, there is a lot of stuff that I didn't know, and you can really never be prepared. And you're learning all the time. But it is like he's been with me all this time. Like, you know, it feels really kind of weird, and it's a hard balance, but you learn on the job. And just when you think you've got it figured out, something changes. Then you have to do everything different. But it's nice. It's like Jane is just encouraging Petra and trying to calm her down. And I've got to say, this is why Jane is such a sweetie, because I could fucking never. I could never. This bitch is out here knocking herself up with stolen sperm. And Jane is comforting her through her freak out during the pregnancy that she allegedly wanted. Y'all, absolutely fucking not. I would be like, oh, you're throwing up all the time? Wow, that's really hard for you. But I don't care. Oh, wow, you really can't sleep and you're consumed by your insecurities and doubts. Wow, I don't care. I would just not be able to have any sympathy whatsoever. Saying you brought this on yourself is not at all strong enough for what this woman has done to herself. She's banana pants. And I cannot. I just can't. Like, oh my God. So, I admire you, Jane. I respect you. You have, frankly, superhuman levels of compassion and understanding. But no. I don't need you here in the hallway comforting Petra. I like it in a way. And in another way, I'm just like, how did she simply get past it so easily? How did she just fucking like, I feel like I didn't see that happen where she just decided, you know, I'm going to forgive her for sidelining the other parent in this partnership that I didn't even want. I didn't even walk into this on purpose. And she's still trying to fuck it up for me. Now Raphael is going to be divided between 3 babies. That's a lot, you know? And granted, he has the money to pay for sitters and nannies and stuff like that. But it's not the same. So anyway, eventually we have the scene where dude with the beard who they had kept hostage, whose name I can never remember, he comes in to speak to Magda. And he says, I love when he walks in, he says, Magda looking good. Here's the thing. Milos knows the two of you set him up to get arrested because of his, like, you know, fraud and whatnot. He will forgive his wife, but will Petra forgive you when she finds out what else you're hiding? And as he says this, Petra comes off the elevator, walks into the hotel room, or the suite it really is. And it's the most over the top, I think, this show has ever been. Where Petra is like filmed with this happy-go-lucky kind of attitude that we never see in her ever. She's just sort of grinning to herself. There's like a jaunty bounce in her step, and she's like smiling dreamily, thinking about the babies and her future, and wearing this little like kind of 60s looking number. And there's just an energy to Petra that's never there. They're really overdoing it on purpose for the next moment, so that when she's got this like delighted smile on her face and she opens the door and it turns into a scream, and the scream is so over the top and it's so silly. And I just couldn't, you guys. It was just so silly. I maintain And I would be interested to see if I'm right about this, but not interested enough to ever actually want to know, because I would have to have this happen. But in a lot of TV shows and stuff where you have like a procedural dealing with a murder, you have the opening scene where somebody finds the body. And almost every time they scream. And I have always thought, if I found a body, I wouldn't scream because I would be too freaked out. There's like for me, I scream when I am startled. I scream when there's something sudden that happens. But I find a body and it's more of a like, what is that? Oh my God. Oh God, it's a body. And that would cause me to sort of shut down as my brain begins to do, what do I do? Do I call the cops? Do I call the hospital? Do I stay here? Do I walk away? Like, how dead are they? Am I in danger if I stay? I would be thinking a million things and I wouldn't scream. But her scream here is just, it's so funny. It's so telenovela-y. And she looks up at her mother, who's got a bloody hook, and this dude is on the floor bleeding out the neck. Because apparently Magda still has her fucking things that she's hiding. She got a teardrop tattooed on her face, which she claims is because of because she wants to like just make people back off and be intimidated of her. So she tries to assure Petra that it's nothing. But when she's meeting Petra the first time, and Petra's talking about, like, do you understand how much time that is about hanging onto the grenades? She says, time creeps in here. Plus, I think that Russian red-haired lady in the kitchen is trying to poison me. I think she killed a Russian lady. That teardrop is the kill. And that she pissed off some Russians. And some other shit's going on now. That's what I think. I don't know who she's connected to, but it feels like she started some trouble. However, that's neither here nor there. But that's basically all of Petra's story this episode. So, running out of time here, I'm going to really quickly, like, Jane in class, I've already talked about a lot of the struggle. The first day that she shows up, she's late, and then there's a call from the oh my God, what do they call it? Pediatrician. She takes the call, steps out into the hall, and it turns out all they want to know is, did he lose a hat? We found a hat, which, this is really funny to me because she does, like, I understand wanting to take a call from a pediatrician right away, but also this is what voicemail's for. It doesn't necessarily mean anything is urgent when a doctor calls. They could just be trying to, like, confirm an appointment that you have later on or get you to pay, like, an outstanding bill, anything. So her deciding to step out, that it's really urgent and she needs to take it, was a bad call on her part. And then she goes to go back into the classroom and the door is locked. And the professor just kind of gives her a look like, that's what happens. You were late and you left immediately to get on the phone. Sorry, bud. So she's really like, I'm sort of wondering if there's going to ever be a romantic thing between her and this professor because he is so close to her in age and he is attractive. But I was not sure, if this was like, there's a moment when he's talking about the writing retreat will be good for her because she gets a paperback and he has given her a C, which is very unexpected. I remember when I was in college, I had been able to really bullshit my way through most papers when I was in high school, and leave things to the last second and make it sound good enough that I was coasting by easy. And then in college, all of the standards change. And I remember the first time I got a paperback and I had gotten like a C+ on some of my best bullshitting work. And I was like, what? And I came to realize quite quickly after speaking to the professor that he saw through the bullshit. like he was able to pinpoint a few spots where he was like, you're just saying things. You don't back them up. You don't cite sources. You don't do anything to prove your point. You just say it, expect me to accept it, and then move on. And I was like, oh, you're a real teacher. What do I do? So I kind of like this. She goes to him to talk about it, and he makes some points that she's kind of like, oh, I guess you're right. Because he says that the love story is predictable, and she's like, isn't that part of the genre of romance? And he's like, that's not an excuse to just, be derivative of other things. So he says the writing retreat will do you good, which she asks, is it mandatory? And he says, none of this is mandatory. If you're in grad school, it's because you chose to be here, which is a really good answer. So then we see her struggling because Mateo needs to get this helmet because the back of his head is flat, which will affect things if it continues to be a problem. His vision and teeth, like apparently it will affect dental stuff. So she feels terrible, of course, because this is happening due to her, she feels, being distracted so much that she leaves him in the same position all the time. And when she goes on this retreat, he's getting fitted for his helmet and he's with Raphael, and she's just like missing out on this whole thing. And it already feels guilty for sort of, she thinks, causing it. But then she meets these people. She comes and sits down, and there's this guy who is like telling a story. Jane sits down and she's like, so what's going on? And he says, I'm sorry, I just feel weird because I was telling a pretty personal story and I don't know anything about you. You don't really share. And the other two girls at the table are like, you're being really rude. This guy's name is Wesley. I'll be honest, I don't think Wesley was being that rude. He is being very straightforward. But he's never actually mean. He doesn't say, you expect me to tell you stuff and you don't say anything. He simply says, I don't know you very well. I'm telling a personal story and you don't share very much. So it doesn't feel like a give and take. I think that's totally reasonable. I don't know. Maybe that just says something about me, but I just didn't. They were like acting like he was being inexcusably rude. And I was like, is he? Well, him and Jane, like, she decides to tell them all the story with her pregnancy and everything. And as she's telling this, I'm thinking, are they going to just suggest that she write this? Because her life is a, novel, But instead, what it looks like is going to happen is Wesley's going to steal her story. And he's writing like a tell-all about what are their names? The Sultanos? And so he pretends to be her friend to get more of these stories out of her. But he's just using her so that he can, excuse me, I'm sorry, I just coughed. He is going to write this really pulpy, I'm trying to think of what the word is, dishy, I guess, kind of book. I really feel bad for Jane because she was so happy to have made a friend in that scene and was really feeling like, oh, finally, I'm beginning to connect with my fellow writers and other students. And it turns out that he is just playing an angle. I don't think he was initially. I think that after she said, it's like the curse of the Sultanos, he was like, huh, interesting. But that's just because he didn't explicitly know what direction he wanted to go with it. I do think that he was kind of feeding on the drama and does not care about her as a person to begin with. So we shall see. I really am sorry for her if that is because I have no doubt this book is going to come out. I bet it will. And she's going to feel so betrayed. Raphael is going to feel so embarrassed. Plus, we see later that Wesley is interviewing Petra's assistant, the hot one, whose name I can never remember. And so there's going to be a lot of less than flattering stuff out there. And what does that do to Jane's relationship in the class? And she gets put on academic suspension at the end of the episode because she literally falls asleep in class while somebody is reading their work. And it's because she's been having issues with pumping and trying to like, and it turns out Mateo, because she's gone and having to pump and like, you know, give the breast milk over in bottles, he is weaned off her. So she can't get him to nurse. And he takes the bottle fine, but he won't get on the breast again. So she's like really upset because she had not intended to wean him. And she had a plan and things aren't working out that way. And Raphael basically is like, things change. You've got to adapt. And maybe you should just stop pumping and we should start to wean him. He's doing really well eating, you know, other foods and stuff. And so they make kind of like this big decision to move into the next phase with his diet and everything, which I do like. The two of them are getting along a lot better as a couple, as parents. I keep saying as a couple, but there comes a point where one of the women in the class, the parenting class with him and Jane, asks Jane if it would be weird if she went out with Raphael. And Jane says it wouldn't. Of course it would. Of course it would. If I were this woman, I would not pursue it. I would just never be able to, you know. But Raphael attempts to connect with Jane. And she stops him and just says, I am not over Michael. And he realizes he's got to try and do something else. Like, he's got to try and move on. So he agrees to go on this date with this woman who seems perfectly nice. And they have a particular date where he is dressed in a tux and Jane winds up, she has like a duct in one breast that is infected, I think is what it is. So she has a fever and it's just like, it feels like shit and is tired. And it turns out when she gets sick, she's a real asshole. So he comes to see her and she basically just tells him to fucking go away and get the hell out of her face, which he's very startled by. But when he goes out into the main room and runs into her mom and grandma and they're like, yeah, she's the worst when she's sick. He later has broken up with the girl he was seeing. And he tells Jane, you were so mean and looked like shit and stank. And I still would have rather been with you than with her. And I just realized there's no point in like leading her on anymore. I'm not invested in this. So by the end of this episode, he's not with her. But I did think it was interesting to see him dating and see how Jane dealt with it. And she seemed fine. And she winds up throwing away like the last little giraffe thing that Michael had made for her that she was holding on to. So she seems good and well over him. And evidently they haven't spoken for months since this whole thing happened. So really interested to see what Michael is going to do next. All right, I have to wrap up. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you again to Claire for commissioning this episode and for April for hanging out. April, I'm so sorry I didn't see your comment earlier. That's the struggle, how to maintain and sustain. I also majorly struggle with perfectionism. It's awful. Like, I've often said, in job interviews, they ask what your biggest flaw is. And saying I'm a perfectionist is the joke answer because you're actually like saying something good about yourself. But anybody who's actually a perfectionist knows it's not a joke. If you deal with it, you are a control freak. You get preoccupied by small details and lose sight of the big picture. It's not a joke answer. I mean it. And I had very good success explaining that in a couple of job interviews. When I gave it as my answer, I was like, and before you laugh in my face, let me explain what perfectionism really looks like because it's not awesome. And I could see that they really understood what I meant. But yeah, Jane, in that respect, I really see eye to eye with her. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you again. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.